They say home is where your heart is. For me, home has always been split between two places, my house in Houston and my truck's cabin. Both felt right in their own way. At least that's what I used to think before everything changed. I'm John, a 46-year-old trucker who spent more time on America's highways than most people spend at their office desks. 23 years behind the wheel, watching life roll by through a windshield wider than most people's TV screens. Laura's been there for 18 of those years. My wife, my anchor, my reason to come back home. Or so I thought. You see, trucking's a peculiar life. Days stretch into weeks, and you learn to live with the endless rhythm of wheels on asphalt. The CB radio crackles with distant voices, and every truck stop feels like a chapter in an endless story. But what kept me going was knowing Laura would be waiting, probably curled up on our porch swing, reading one of her mystery novels. "I miss you terribly when you're gone," she'd always say, her green eyes sparkling as I walked through the door. Those words were my comfort during long nights on the road, my lullaby in noisy truck stops, my morning coffee when fatigue crept in around dawn. Our routine was simple, but it worked. 3 weeks on the road, 1 week home, like clockwork, predictable as the sunset. I'd bring her small gifts from different states, maple syrup from Vermont, peaches from Georgia, silly souvenir magnets that crowded our fridge door. She'd cook my favorite meals, and we'd catch up on all the little things that made up our lives apart. Rick's been pouring drinks at the Rusty Nail since before Laura and I got married. He's the kind of bartender who knows everyone's story but keeps most secrets to himself. I never expected him to become such an important part of mine. But that's the thing about life. The most crucial moments often come wrapped in ordinary packaging. That phone call from Rick, it wasn't just a friendly check-in, it was the first domino in a line I didn't even know existed. His voice was casual enough, but something in it made my stomach drop even before he finished his first sentence. Looking back now, I realize that moment was like watching a crack appear in a windshield. At first, it seems small, manageable. But, deep down, it's only going to spread until the whole thing shatters, and you're left holding the pieces wondering how something so solid could break so completely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it all unfolded, how my predictable life turned into something I never saw coming, even with all those years of watching the road ahead. It was somewhere in Nebraska when Rick's call came through. Just another Tuesday evening, with the sun painting the sky in shades of orange I'd seen 1,000 times before. I was planning to stop for the night soon, already dreaming about a hot shower and maybe catching the game on TV. "Hey, John?" Rick's voice had that careful tone that makes your spine straighten automatically. "Got a minute? There's something you should know." I pulled into the next rest stop, killing the engine, but leaving my flashers on. 23 years of intuition told me this wasn't the kind of conversation you have while driving. "Laura's been coming to the bar," he said, each word measured like a careful pour. "Not alone." My hand tightened on the phone. "What do you mean, not alone?" "There's this guy, tall, dark hair, looks like he works in an office. They've been in a few times now. Last Friday." Rick paused, and I could hear ice cubes clinking in a glass. "Last Friday they weren't just having drinks, John. They were together, the way couples are." The parking lot lights flickered on automatically as dusk settled in. I watched a moth dance around the nearest one, throwing frantic shadows. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sand from the Arizona desert. "How long?" My voice came out steady, surprising even me. 3, maybe 4 weeks that I've seen, could be longer elsewhere. I wouldn't have called, but... Another pause. "You're my friend, John." And the way they were acting, it wasn't a one-time thing. I sat there, watching trucks roll past, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness like searchlights. Each one could have been me just hours ago, blissfully unaware that my life was about to change. "Keep an eye out," I said finally. "Don't let on that you know anything. I need I need to think about this. After hanging up, I sat in the dark cabin, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. 18 years of marriage played through my mind like a highlight reel. Our wedding, buying the house, all those homecomings. Now each memory had a question mark attached to it, like a photo suddenly showing details you hadn't noticed before. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched the stars fade and the sun rise, planning my next move with the same precision I used to plan my routes. The next few days were the strangest of my career. I drove like always, delivered on schedule like always, but everything felt different. It was like driving through a familiar city after an earthquake. All the landmarks are there, but nothing feels stable anymore. I called Laura each night, our usual routine. She answered with the same, "I miss you," that used to warm my heart. Now each word felt like a nail being driven into my chest. "Everything okay?" she asked on the third night. "You sound different." "Just tired," I lied, realizing I was becoming an actor in my own life. "Long haul today." "Poor baby," she cooed. "I'll give you a nice massage when you get home." I wondered if she used those same gentle hands to touch him, if she spoke to him with that same softness in her voice. The thought made my stomach turn, but I kept my voice steady. "Looking forward to it." That's when I made my decision. I wouldn't be the raging husband throwing accusations and furniture. I'd seen too many guys lose everything, dignity, respect, even their kids, by letting anger drive. No, this required something different. I called Rick back during my next break. "I need a favor," I said, watching rain start to speckle my windshield. "You still have those security cameras in the bar?" "Yeah, management installed them last year. Got a good view of the whole place." "Next time they come in," I paused, tasting the bitterness of what I was about to say, "I need you to get it on video. Everything. How they act, what they do. Can you do that?" There was a long silence. "You sure that's what you want, John?" "Sometimes, not knowing the details—" "I need to know everything," I cut him off. "Every detail, every moment. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." "All right," Rick sighed. "But John, don't let this eat you up inside. I've seen it happen to better men than you." I almost laughed. It was already eating me up, turning every mile of road into a tunnel of dark thoughts. But somewhere in that darkness, a plan was taking shape. Cold, calculated, and perfect. The video arrived 2 weeks later, while I was parked at a truck stop in Oklahoma. Rick sent it with a simple message. "Recorded last night. You might want to be sitting down for this." I waited until dark, pulled the privacy curtains in my cabin, and pressed play. The bar's security footage was surprisingly clear enough to see Laura's smile as she walked in with him, clear enough to see how his hand rested on the small of her back, clear enough to watch them dance, laugh, kiss. The man was exactly as Rick described, tall, well-dressed, probably some office type. They looked happy. That's what twisted the knife deeper. This wasn't some drunk mistake or meaningless fling. This was intimacy, connection, everything we were supposed to have. I watched the whole thing twice, noting every detail, the way she touched his face when they kissed, how they shared inside jokes, the comfortable familiarity that only comes with time. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed steady. I felt something inside me shift, like gears changing on a steep hill. "Thanks," I texted Rick. "I've seen enough." Then I opened my route planning software, the same one I used to map deliveries across the country. But this time, I wasn't planning a delivery. I was planning something else entirely. First, I checked my next scheduled home time, 3 weeks away. Perfect. Then I pulled up my contact list. Everyone who'd ever been to our house for dinner, every friend who'd celebrated holidays with us, every colleague Laura had mentioned. I started making calls using my Bluetooth as I drove through the night. "Hey, just wanted to let you know I'm planning a surprise dinner party for Laura, 3 weeks from Saturday. Yeah, something special. Can you make it? Great. And listen, if you run into her, don't mention it. You know how surprises are. One by one, the pieces fell into place. The guest list grew. The venue was booked. Not our house, but a private room at Laura's favorite restaurant. I even called her lover's office, pretending to be a client, just to get his full name. Mark Stevens. Another piece of the puzzle. As I crossed into Texas, watching the sun rise in my mirrors, I felt strangely calm. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, I'd had plenty of practice keeping things cool. It's what refrigerated trucks do best. The hardest part wasn't planning the revenge. The hardest part was acting normal during our nightly calls. Each "I love you" from her felt like swallowing broken glass, but I matched her performance with my own. I became an actor in a play where I knew the ending but had to pretend I was still on page 1. I might be able to come home a few days early next time, I told her during one call. The lie felt smooth on my tongue, practiced. The company's been good about scheduling lately. Really? Her voice brightened. That would be wonderful, honey. I've been missing you so much. I wondered if she texted him right after our calls, laughing about how clueless her trucker husband was. The thought should have made me angry, but instead, it just reinforced my resolve. The best tricks are the ones your audience never sees coming. I spent my free hours working out the details. The restaurant was easy, Laura's favorite Italian place, Bella Vista. They had a private room that could hold 30 people comfortably. The manager, Tony, was excited about hosting what he thought was an anniversary surprise. We'll make it special, he promised. The works, champagne, decorations, everything. I paid extra for a projector and screen setup. For a slideshow, I explained. Old photos, you know. The guest list grew strategically. I invited people from every part of our lives, neighbors, her co-workers, our closest friends. Each call required careful timing, made between deliveries or during breaks. Each conversation had to sound casual, excited, normal. The surprise was going to be epic, just not the kind they were expecting. Getting Mark Stevens on the guest list was the trickiest part. I couldn't invite him directly. That would raise too many questions. Instead, I called Laura's office and asked her assistant, Jenny, to help with the surprise party. Could you make sure everyone from her department knows? I want it to be really special. I could hear Jenny smile through the phone. She'd always liked me, always said Laura was lucky. Of course, I'll make sure everyone comes, even the new people. I knew Mark would be included. From what Rick had told me, he and Laura barely tried to hide their relationship at work. They probably thought they were being subtle, but people notice things. They always do. The RSVPs started rolling in. Each yes was another piece clicking into place. I kept track of everything in a small notebook I carried in my chest pocket, right above my heart. Fitting, considering what this was all about. Between planning calls, I watched the video from Rick again and again. Not to torture myself, but to study it like a manual. Each viewing made me notice new details. How she touched her hair differently around Mark. How her laugh had a pitch I'd never heard before. How they moved in sync like they'd been dancing together for years. Some nights, sitting in my truck's cabin, I'd catch myself wondering about the moment they first crossed the line. Was it a slow slide into betrayal, or did they jump in all at once? Did she hesitate? Did she think of me at all? But those thoughts were dangerous, leading down paths that ended in anger and pain. I needed to stay cold, stay focused. I kept driving my routes, delivering loads on time, playing the reliable trucker everyone knew. But inside, I was counting down the days. Each mile brought me closer to the moment when everything would change. My GPS might have been pointing toward different cities, but my mind was fixed on one destination, the night when the truth would finally come out. A week before the planned dinner, I made a special delivery to Houston. Not my usual cargo, just a small thumb drive containing the video from Rick. I handed it to a guy who specialized in audio-visual presentations. Met him through another trucker who'd used him for his daughter's wedding. I want it perfect, I told him, watching him plug the drive into his computer. High definition, clear sound, the works. And I need you to edit it just right. Start with the slow dance, then the kissing, then the intimate moments at the table. Make it flow like a love story. He looked at me questioningly, but I just smiled. It's a special surprise, I said. Money has a way of stopping questions before they start. While he worked on the video, I drove my final route before the early return. Every mile marker felt like a countdown. I called Laura more frequently now, letting my excitement about coming home early bleed into my voice. The lies came easier each time. I can't wait to see you, she said. Maybe we can have a quiet dinner, just the two of us? Actually, I replied, I was thinking we could go out, celebrate my early return. How about Bella Vista on Saturday? She agreed immediately. Of course she did. It was her favorite place. I wondered if she'd ever taken Mark there, if they'd sat in the same booth where we'd celebrated our anniversaries. Rick kept me updated on their visits to the bar. They'd grown bolder, he said, more public with their affection, more certain they wouldn't get caught. It was perfect. Their confidence would make the reveal even more devastating. I spent my nights in truck stops, going over every detail. The guest list was finalized, 28 people, including Mark. I'd arranged the seating chart carefully. Laura would be next to me, of course. Mark would be within clear view of the projection screen. Everyone who mattered in our lives would have a perfect view of both the screen and their reactions. The restaurant staff had their instructions. Tony, the manager, thought he was helping create a romantic surprise. The waiters were told to keep the champagne flowing. Liquid courage for what was to come. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and the impact would be lost. Too late, and people might leave before the main event. I also made some practical preparations. Met with a divorce lawyer recommended by a fellow trucker who'd been through something similar. Had the house's locks changed? The locksmith thought I was just being security conscious. Transferred some money to a new account, just in case. Everything by the book, everything legal. No need to give her ammunition for later. The hardest part was packing my things without her noticing. I did it in stages, each time I was home, moving essential items to a storage unit I'd rented. Nothing obvious, just enough to get by after everything went down. She never noticed the gradual disappearance of my life from our house. Too busy with her own secrets, I guess. Through it all, I maintained my routine, logged my hours, made my deliveries, filed my reports. The other drivers noticed nothing different about old John. If anything, I seemed more focused, more efficient. Pain has a way of sharpening your edge, making you precise in everything you do. Each night, alone in my cabin, I'd replay the scene in my mind, the looks on their faces when the video started playing, the gasps from the guests, the moment when their perfect little secret world came crashing down. Some might call it obsession. I called it preparation. When you're planning to tear down someone's reality, you better make sure every detail is perfect. The day before the dinner, I parked my truck at the depot for the last time. It felt strange, knowing I wouldn't be seeing it for a while. 18 years of marriage were about to end in that restaurant. But somehow saying goodbye to my truck felt just as significant. At least the truck had never lied to me. I picked up the edited video on my way home. The AV guy had done an excellent job. The footage was crystal clear, the sequence perfect. He'd even added some soft background music, though I doubted anyone would be paying attention to that when the time came. Everything's set for tomorrow, Tony from Bella Vista confirmed over the phone. Projector tested, screen positioned, champagne ordered. We'll start serving at 7:30 sharp. I thanked him, adding a generous tip to my credit card in advance. Might as well use the joint account one last time. When I walked through our front door, Laura was waiting with her usual smile and embrace. Her perfume, her touch, her kiss. Everything felt like a performance now that I knew the truth. I hugged her back, playing my part in this final act of our marriage. "I'm so glad you're home early," she said, her hands lingering on my chest, right above where I kept my notebook of plans. "I've missed you so much." I wondered if she'd texted Mark about my early return, if they'd had to cancel plans, reschedule their meetups. The thought almost made me laugh. By this time tomorrow, scheduling would be the least of their concerns. "Missed you too," I replied, and for a moment I meant it. I missed who I thought she was. I missed the life I thought we had. That night we had takeout Chinese and watched TV like nothing was wrong, like tomorrow wasn't going to change everything. Laura fell asleep on the couch, and I watched her for a while, trying to reconcile this peaceful image with the woman in Rick's video. They seemed like two different people, but I knew better now. I spent most of the night checking and rechecking every detail. The guest list, 28 confirmations, including Mark. The seating arrangement, printed and given to Tony. The video, tested 3 times on my laptop. The new house keys, already on my keyring. The lawyer, on standby for Monday morning. Around dawn, I stepped out onto our porch and watched the sunrise. It was going to be a beautiful day in Houston, perfect weather for destroying someone's world. I thought about all the sunrises I'd seen from my truck, all the miles I'd driven thinking I was heading home to something real. Laura found me there, brought me coffee like she always did when I was home. "You're up early," she said, concerned. "Everything okay?" "Just excited about tonight," I replied. It wasn't even a lie. "You're going to love what I have planned." She smiled, touched my face in that way that used to mean everything. "You're so good to me, John." I smiled back, thinking of the video, the guests, the carefully orchestrated revelation to come. "You have no idea, honey, no idea at all." Bella Vista was perfect that evening. Soft lighting, gentle Italian music, the kind of atmosphere that makes everything feel special. Laura was radiant in her black dress, completely unaware that she'd dressed up for her own undoing. "John, what's going on?" she asked as we walked in, noticing the unusual number of cars in the parking lot. "The place looks packed." "Just a popular night, I guess," I replied, guiding her toward the private room, my hand on the small of her back, the same spot where Mark's hand had been in the video. The look on her face when we opened the door was priceless. Everyone was there, friends, neighbors, co-workers, and Mark sitting near the back, his face going through a fascinating series of expressions, surprise, confusion, and then carefully controlled neutrality. Professional guy like him, probably used to keeping his cool in tough situations. "Surprise!" everyone shouted. Laura's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. If I hadn't known better, I'd have thought they were just tears of joy. "Oh my God, John, what is all this?" "Couldn't come home early without making it special," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The perfect husband, always thinking of his wife. We made our way around the room, greeting everyone. I watched Laura carefully when we reached Mark's table. The way she controlled her reaction, the slight tremor in her voice as she said hello, she'd gotten good at hiding things, I had to give her that. Tony outdid himself with the setup. The long tables formed a U shape, giving everyone a clear view of both us and the projection screen at the front. The champagne was already flowing, creating that loose, celebratory atmosphere that makes revelations hit even harder. "A toast," I announced once everyone was seated. The room quieted down, all eyes on me. "To my beautiful wife, Laura." I stood up, champagne glass in hand, looking at all the faces around the room. Friends who'd been to our barbecues, colleagues who'd shared holidays with us, neighbors who'd watched our house when I was on the road, and Mark sitting there with his practiced smile, probably thinking he was getting away with it all. "You know, being a trucker means spending a lot of time away from home," I began, my voice steady. "It means missing birthdays sometimes, anniversaries. It means trusting that what you leave behind We'll be there when you return." Laura smiled up at me, squeezing my hand. In the low light, I could see the glint of her wedding ring, the one she somehow managed to keep wearing through all of this. But what makes it worthwhile is knowing you have someone special waiting for you, someone loyal, someone true. I paused, letting my eyes meet Mark's for just a moment. Someone who makes all those lonely miles mean something. The room was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving, sensing something in my tone perhaps. Laura's smile had started to fade slightly, some instinct finally warning her that something wasn't quite right. "So before we eat," I continued, "I'd like to share something special with all of you. A little video that I think captures the true spirit of loyalty and devotion." I nodded to Tony, who dimmed the lights. The projector hummed to life, its beam cutting through the darkness like a spotlight of truth about to expose everything. The screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the rusty nail. For a moment, there was just the familiar bar setting, nothing special. Then Laura and Mark walked into frame. I heard her sharp intake of breath beside me, felt her hand suddenly grip my arm. But I kept my eyes forward, watching as the scene unfolded on the screen. There they were, dancing close, her head on his shoulder. The camera angle was perfect, no mistaking their faces, no room for denial. The background music from the edit was soft, making their intimacy seem even more stark against the silence in our private dining room. Then came the kiss. Long, passionate, comfortable, the kind of kiss that speaks of practiced familiarity. Someone gasped. I think it was Jenny from Laura's office. The sound seemed to break some sort of spell, and suddenly the room was full of whispers, shifting chairs, awkward coughs. "John," Laura's voice was barely audible. "John, please!" I held up my hand, eyes still on the screen. "Wait for it. The best part's coming up." And it did. The footage showed them at their table, hands intertwined, laughing about something. Laura leaned in close to whisper in Mark's ear. His hand traced patterns on her arm, the same arm that was now trembling against my sleeve. "That's enough." Mark's voice cut through the murmurs. He'd half risen from his chair. "This is inappropriate." I finally turned to look at him, letting a cold smile spread across my face. "Inappropriate? That's an interesting choice of words, Mark. Tell me, what's the appropriate way to handle finding out your wife's been sleeping with another man?" The room erupted in a chaos of reactions. Some people stood up, others seemed frozen in place. Mrs. Henderson from next door had her hands pressed against her mouth. Bill from Laura's accounting department was staring into his champagne glass like it held the secrets of the universe. "How could you do this?" Laura's voice was stronger now, anger starting to replace shock. "How dare you humiliate me like this?" I turned to her slowly, feeling eerily calm. "Humiliate you? That's rich, Laura, really rich. Tell me, how many times did you humiliate me behind my back? How many people at work knew? How many of our friends had to keep your dirty little secret?" The video was still playing, showing more moments of their affair. Each new scene was like a chapter in a book I'd never wanted to read. Laura with her hand on Mark's chest, Mark kissing her neck. Their secret world, now exposed for everyone to see. "I want everyone to understand exactly what's happening here," I announced to the room, my voice carrying over the chaos. "This isn't just about tonight. This isn't a heat-of-the-moment revelation. I've known for weeks, watched you lie to my face every single day, planned this evening very carefully." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "Inside this are divorce papers, already filed. The house is in my name, always has been. The bank accounts are already separated. Everything's legal, everything's by the book." Mark had finally found his voice. "You're insane. This is completely "Shut up!" I cut him off, not even looking his way. "You don't get to speak. Not here. Not now. This isn't about you. This is about 18 years of marriage ending exactly the way it should, with the truth finally coming out." Laura was crying now, mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. Somewhere in the back of my mind I remembered how beautiful she'd looked just an hour ago. Amazing how quickly things can change, how quickly they can reveal their true nature. "The party's over," I announced, standing up. "Tony will serve dinner to anyone who wants to stay. It's already paid for. Laura, I'm sure Mark will give you a ride home, though you might want to start thinking about whose home you'll be going to from now on." I made it halfway to the door before Laura's voice stopped me. "That's it?" Her voice cracked with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You just destroy everything and walk away?" I turned around slowly. The room had become a tableau of frozen faces and held breaths. Some guests were already gathering their things, eager to escape. Others seemed rooted to their chairs, unable to look away from the wreckage of our marriage. Destroy everything? I let out a quiet laugh that didn't sound like me at all. "No, Laura, you did that. I'm just turning on the lights so everyone can see what's really been going on in the dark." Mark stood up, straightening his tie like armor. "John, let's be reasonable here. This didn't have to be so public." "Reasonable?" The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "Was it reasonable when you were sleeping with my wife? Was it reasonable when you both laughed about the clueless trucker husband behind my back?" Laura stepped between us, her mascara-stained face a mixture of defiance and fear. "You don't understand anything. All those weeks alone, all those missed anniversaries, birthdays—" "Don't." My voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't you dare try to justify this. I gave you 18 years, worked my ass off so we could have a good life. If you were unhappy, you could have said something, could have asked for a divorce, could have done anything except betray every promise we ever made to each other." The video was still playing silently in the background, a ghostly reminder of why we were all here. Someone finally had the sense to turn it off, plunging that corner of the room into darkness. "I loved you," I said, looking directly at Laura. "Every mile I drove, every night alone in that truck, it was all for us, for our future. Guess I was just driving in the wrong direction all this time." Mrs. Henderson started crying softly. Bill from accounting was helping his wife into her coat. The room was gradually emptying, people slipping away like shadows at dawn. "The locks are changed," I continued, my voice steady. "Your things will be packed and sent wherever you want them. The lawyer has my contact information." I turned to the remaining guests. "I'm sorry you all had to be part of this, but sometimes the truth needs witnesses." "John, please." Laura made one last attempt, reaching for my arm. "We can talk about this. We can fix this." I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "No, we can't. Because the problem isn't what you did, Laura. It's who you are, who you've become, or maybe who you've always been, and I just couldn't see it from the road." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark stood awkwardly by his chair, his professional demeanor cracked beyond repair. Laura's hand was still outstretched, grasping at empty air where my arm had been. I took one last look around the room, at the abandoned champagne glasses, the untouched plates, the scattered napkins that looked like white flags of surrender. Then I walked out, letting the door close behind me with a quiet click that sounded like the period at the end of an 18-year sentence. I drove through Houston that night for hours, letting the city lights blur past my car windows. Funny how different everything looked from a car instead of my usual truck. Smaller somehow, more personal. Like the difference between watching a storm from above the clouds and being right in the middle of it. My phone kept buzzing with messages and calls. Friends, neighbors, even Laura's family. I ignored them all. The only one I answered was Rick. "It's done," I told him, when I finally pulled into a parking lot overlooking the city. "You okay?" His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen this story before, maybe too many times. "You know what's strange?" I watched planes taking off from the distant airport, their lights cutting through the darkness. "I don't feel anything right now. No anger, no satisfaction, nothing." "That'll come later," Rick said. "Trust me on this one." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Bar's open if you need a place to go." I thought about it. The familiar comfort of the rusty nail, the understanding silence Rick was so good at maintaining. But no, that was their place now, marked by the memories captured in that video. Thanks, but I've got somewhere else in mind. I ended the call and started the car again. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the truck depot. My rig was still there, waiting like an old friend. I climbed up into the cabin, settled into the familiar seat, and just sat there, breathing in the scent of diesel and leather and thousands of miles of memories that had nothing to do with Laura. Tomorrow, I'd call dispatch and get back on the road. Tonight, though, I just needed to sit here, in the one place that had always been completely mine, the one truth in my life that had never been a lie. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. The lawyer handled most of it. He'd seen enough divorces to know exactly what needed to be done. Laura tried calling a few more times before finally giving up. I learned from Rick that she'd moved in with Mark. Somehow, that information didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. I threw myself back into work, taking the longest routes available, Seattle to Miami, Boston to Los Angeles. The kind of runs most drivers try to avoid. But for me, the longer drives were better. Each mile put more distance between me and that night at Bella Vista. "You're running," Rick said during one of our calls. "Can't drive away from what happened forever." "Not running," I replied, watching the sunset paint the Arizona desert in shades of gold and purple, just giving myself time to think. And I was thinking about all the signs I'd missed over the years, about the way Laura's voice had changed in our phone calls months before I knew the truth, about how sometimes the life you think you're living is just a story you've been telling yourself. The other drivers noticed something different about me. Not the rage they probably expected, not the bitter anger of a man betrayed. Instead, they saw something else, a kind of quiet certainty, a man who had finally stopped carrying a weight he didn't even know he'd been bearing. Jenny from Laura's office sent me a text. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Everyone at work knew, but nobody had the courage to tell you. I'm sorry for that." I didn't respond, but I appreciated her honesty. It was refreshing after all the lies. The truth has a way of clearing the air, even when it hurts. Maybe especially when it hurts. During a stopover in Chicago, I found myself in a diner, drinking coffee and watching other trucks roll by. The waitress asked if I was waiting for someone. "No," I said, and realized I was smiling. "Not anymore." It wasn't happiness, not exactly, but it was something close to peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally stop pretending, when you face the truth head on, and let it change you into whatever you're supposed to become next. 6 months after that night at Bella Vista, I found myself back in Houston. The divorce was final, the house sold, the last traces of my old life packed away in boxes or given to charity. I had one last stop to make before heading out on my next route. The rusty nail looked exactly the same as it had in that video. Rick was behind the bar, polishing glasses like he always did. The evening crowd hadn't arrived yet, leaving the place quiet and cool. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, already reaching for a glass. "Neither did I admitted, settling onto a bar stool. Figured it was time." He poured me a whiskey, then one for himself. "To new beginnings?" "To the truth," I corrected, raising my glass, "no matter how much it hurts." We drank in silence for a moment, letting the memories of that night settle around us like dust after a storm. "You know," Rick said finally, "most guys would have just started throwing punches, made a scene right here in the bar. But you turned it into something else." I thought about that night, about Laura's face when the video started playing, about Mark's carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about taking back your own dignity. The sun was setting outside, painting the sky in those familiar trucker's colors I'd grown to love. My rig was waiting in the parking lot, loaded and ready for the long haul to Portland. "Time to hit the road?" Rick asked, seeing me check my watch. I stood up, leaving enough cash to cover both drinks and a generous tip. Always is. Walking back to my truck, I felt lighter somehow. Not because I'd forgotten. You never really forget something like that. But because I'd finally learned the difference between carrying something and being carried by it. I climbed into the cabin, fired up the engine, and pulled out onto the highway. In my mirrors, Houston's lights were starting to come on, creating their own constellation against the darkening sky. Somewhere in that sea of lights was my old life. But ahead? Ahead was nothing but open road and possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, that felt exactly right.